Welcome everyone to the fabulous Giant City State Park. I have to say, being a local, I tend to get a little cocky because we're talking about sites in Southern Illinois. I'm like, yeah, I've been there, done that. But I have not. Grantsburg Swamp is new. So I'm really excited to have Chris here to talk about it. Thank you, Chris.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here to talk about this topic because, I give a lot of presentations every year. I do a lot of the same presentations over and over, and that's great. But I do 4 of them a year here at Giant City State Park, and it gives me an opportunity to develop something new every year. So this is a brand new presentation I have not delivered before about the Flora of Grantsburg Swamp, which is a really special place, one of my favorites that I have come to really enjoy over multiple trips, especially the last several years, doing the rare plant monitoring that I do. Because my current position right now is full-time with Southern Illinois University as a coordinator of the Plants of Concern program. This is a rare plant monitoring program where we enlist the help of volunteers to do monitoring. It's been done out of the Chicago Botanic Garden for over 20 years. In 2021, they expanded the project to Southern Illinois, and that's when I was hired to coordinate it. Also, you can find me online as Illinois Botanizer, my website, illinoisbotanizer.com. And I have social media checked off, mainly Facebook and somewhat less on Instagram and then YouTube. So I'm recording this presentation and I'll put it on my YouTube channel sometime later this week. Also on my website, I've been botanizing. I moved to Illinois in 2004 to go to graduate school in Urbana-Champaign. And except for a short little stay in Missouri, I've been here ever since. And so I have almost 20 years worth of photography of wildflowers and plants in Illinois. Been putting them on my website. It's a work in progress. It is incomplete, but there is a lot of neat stuff on there. Sometimes when I'm Googling images for a plant, if it's somewhat obscure and I just type it into Google, sometimes my page comes up when the top hits because no one has pictures of that particular plant online. So that's kind of neat. But I keep working at that. So I've also added a land acknowledgement to all my programs, just taking a moment to understand that other people lived here at one time and had a very profound influence on the landscape that we see today. And of course, we've irrevocably changed a lot of that landscape. So it's important to just acknowledge the past and history of the area. I want to set this up by saying that George Fell was really an instrumental leader in the natural areas movement in the world. He grew up around Rockford, Illinois. And through his efforts, he founded the Nature Conservancy and then later the Natural Land Institute, and he pushed for the Illinois Nature Preserves Commission law. He was the first person really to successfully champion the idea of setting aside pristine land on the landscape and preserving it in perpetuity. And so he wrote the legislation for this, championed the idea, had the vision, got it passed in the legislature. So that's the 60th anniversary law that I was referring to, the Illinois Nature Preserve System. The first state to do so, the voluntary program where the landowner voluntarily enrolls their land in this program to protect it forever. And so it's really amazing law that all other states have followed suit and added that. So we have George and his wife, Barbara, to thank for this effort. Because he basically said that what we have to save, we have to save now, or it's going to be gone and we will never have another chance. Now in Illinois, we have over 500 nature preserves in the state. So it's quite a legacy there. This led to the natural areas inventory. We're like, okay, we now have a mechanism to save land and protect it. What land do we want to save? Where are all the places that need saving? So the inventory was a statewide effort to catalog all of these areas that were in a pristine natural condition. Again, Illinois was the first state to do this, and this was in the 70s, started in 1976, and probably because we were converting the land so quickly, and we realized, again, like George said, we need to do this now or it'll be gone and we won't have this chance later. That being so, in the first 3-year push of the systematic scan, they found 0.07% of the state in a pristine natural condition. So a very small amount. But if you look at the map through Illinois, every county, every one of the 102 counties in Illinois has a natural area within it. And a lot of them are privately owned. In Southern Illinois, there's a lot. In northeastern Illinois, there's a lot as well. So that's why I like this quote from E.O. Wilson that every scrap of biodiversity is priceless, never to be surrendered without a struggle. Because for all intents and purposes, we have scraps left in Illinois and they're priceless and precious and they need to be protected as when possible. So I want to talk about Grantsburg Swamp. It's when they did the Illinois Natural Areas Inventory and they found an area of interest, they would often name it by a nearby feature. The river name, a church sometimes nearby was in the name. We reached Chapel Bluffs. Sometimes there's a little town or an old settlement. So in this case, the little town of Grantsburg is why we call this Grantsburg Swamp. And that's where it is located. You can see on Highway 146, just east of Vienna, Illinois. So you can see the blue dot here up there. That's my house there in McCanda, south of Carbondale. Taking that picture. So we zoom in here to the Google images. You can see Grantsburg Swamp, the little town of Grantsburg there. Highway 146 is on the southern end of the site. Unfortunately, it does bisect the swamp a little bit through there, but most of the swamp is to the north. And then this is Flatwoods Road here, which is paved road. And on this side actually is part of the prison landscape. And I've just found out that it's possible maybe to get in there, with the background check and clearance and all that stuff. I would like to explore the swamp to the west of Flatwoods Road at some point. But the other interesting thing about this area is as you continue this road north, about here, you're going to go up a big hill and then turn, and now you're up on top of the bluff there. So that's interesting that the swamp it's the sort of part of the northern end of the coastal plain extent. So we get into the Lesser Shawnee Hills as you go north. It's totally different natural division. So having those right next to each other in that area, of course, adds to the diversity and the features and such.
Chris?
Yes.
You might be interested to know that bluff is a great hibernacula, similar to Pine Hills and Blue Swamp.
I have heard that.
Yeah.
Yes. I haven't seen any snakes there, but yeah, I've heard that. I will also mention, so this area right here is basically the Tupelo dominated portion of the swamp. And then this up and through here is very wet. So I haven't explored that, but often we just park somewhere and there's a little, well, I'll show you on this next photo here. So this is the brown is the Shawnee National Forest boundary. The pink is the natural areas boundary. And the dots are areas that I've explored. So when you take tracks, it takes basically points on your GPS, and then you can make a point into a line. But I just have the point. So I've explored a little bit off of the road over here, and then we've done a lot in this area, and then up there as well. But there's huge unexplored areas that I haven't been to yet. So this is all Tupelo. This is all really, really wet, like waist deep water. So sometimes it's open water. You're not going to see a lot of vegetation there. So that's the lay of the land. And then, yeah, you can see here on the road, the topo lines as you go up the bluff there on that portion. And then there's a little private piece here, which of course is part's been cleared into a pasture. And then it comes out into the swamp a little bit there as well, cuts across. But most of it is in ownership by the Shawnee National Forest. And so it says, well, I'll go back to that. So here is a classification of all the natural communities that are known in the state of Illinois. This was revised in 2017. So you can see there's types of forests, types of prairies, types of wetlands, etc. So if we zoom in on just looking at the different wetland types, we're talking about basically sedge meadows and fens are farther north. So marshes and swamps. Marshes are really more up north, cattail marshes and things. So primarily in the coastal plain natural division, you're going to find swamps and shrub swamps. And the swamps can be dominated by cypress or tupelo or both, but other wetland trees and other wetland plants as well. So we're talking about swamps and shrub swamps. So here's the crew at Grantsburg Swamp Ecological Area. This was September 21st in 2021. Gretel there on the left is the manager of the whole Plants of Concern program. She's up at the Chicago Botanic Garden. Katie was her assistant who's moved on to another job. Travis is in the middle there. He worked with me a couple summers as my assistant, and then Nick Seaton on the end was involved in the project as well when he was with the River to River Cooperative Weed Management Area, and now he's ecologist at the Shawnee National Forest. So we still work together a lot. But we went there to doing surveys for Styrax americanus, which is the American snowbell bush, and that's why we're there taking a picture at the sign. This is an ecological area, so collectively we can think of these areas as natural areas. There's different types of natural areas. Some of them are called botanical areas. Some of them are called geological areas. Some of them are called zoological areas. And then we have ecological areas as well. And then there's even research natural areas, which are like the 10 best sites that are most representative of the diversity of community types that we have in this area. So a lot of the natural areas on the, of which there are 80, most of them are called ecological areas in the Shawnee National Forest. And this sign is right along Highway 146. So what's interesting about the swamps is sometimes they're dominated by cypress and sometimes they're dominated by tupelo. And often they can be mixed, but they're not usually mixed, well mixed. It's usually heavy on one side or the other. So you go to Heron Pond, it's mostly cypress there. There's a few tupelos mixed in. Go to Section 8 Boardwalk, mostly tupelo, a few cypress mixed in. Here, they're kind of in different parts of the area. So this is part with dominated by cypress. And then here is the area dominated by tupelo, which is primarily what you see if you were to drive on Highway 146. So this is a main two reasons why people don't go to this site. For one, there's really not any good access. You're parking along a paved road that's sloped down to the ditch. It's hard to get off the road and everywhere you want to park. There's no trails, there's no parking area, there's no facilities. So you just pull over and head into the cottonmouth infested swamp. It keeps people out generally. But, you know, some people are not deterred by that. And if that is the case, such as for me, then it is marvelous. In fact, that adds to the beauty and the excitement of being in this just such a different sort of habitat, going through the swamp, going through the muck, being ready for anything. So here's other parts of the swamp. I think there may be, you can safely assume that almost everywhere there's hydrological disturbance. We have really altered the way that water flows through the landscape. And of course, we have these huge watersheds. And so it really matters the route that water takes to flow, to the river or where it gets impounded. And so I think the water levels are artificially high, and it's causing a lot of the tree death in Grantsburg Swamp. But some of these areas are much more open. And of course, those are places where plants that like more sun can occur. So there's a picture of the swamp. There's another picture of another part of the swamp. This is a southern vine here that's called Macania scandens. Botanists can never remember common names. It's an aster, and it's a composite family. So that's kind of neat. Here's another picture. This really shows how plants are going to use whatever substrate they can find to grow when there's water around. Some plants can, grow in the water, grow through the water. Some plants don't want to grow in the water, but they grow on logs or cypress knees or wherever they can get a perch to exist. And so it makes it fun to go over there and say, well, let's go over here growing on this log. Let's check this out. Might find something neat. And then as I was mentioning earlier, what's really cool about the swamp here is that it's adjacent to cliffs and uplands. If you go to Louisiana and Mississippi, that phenomenon isn't the same. And so that's one reason why swamps in Southern Illinois are so neat, is that they're next to these uplands and cliffs and various features like that. So if you're doing a botanical list, which I do almost everywhere that I go, you get a whole new set of plants if you get some upland habitat there. So that adds for the fun. Like, let's go up in this area, we add 20, 30 more species we didn't have on our list just because it's so dry. And then I found this swamp creature out there in one of my visits. So this is Nick Seaton. He was helping me. This was actually on my birthday, November 2nd, 2021. We were out there still looking for Styrax americanus. I had this huge survey and we wanted to get it all mapped, and he climbed into that fallen root system there. So that's funny. But back to the surveys here. So we can see the crew here wandering through the swamp. We're looking for the American snowbell bush, which I do have a picture of later in the slideshow. But that is a particular wetland shrub that the leaves turn very yellow late in the year, and it makes it pretty conspicuous. You would think you're still surveying for this shrub in November. And yes, you can still find it. So that's what we're doing here, wandering through the swamp. Now, this was fun. We saw 5 cottonmouths that day. So here's Gretel taking pictures on this log. She was crossing this log, and there was one of the biggest cottonmouths that I've ever seen on that log. And I just got a photo before, of course, it slid into the water, and you're there standing in the water wondering, where's that snake going? But, snakes don't want to mess with people. They're fleeing. You just give them an opportunity to escape. Honestly, I do. I mean, I try to be cognizant when I'm in an area where I know that there's a lot of rattlesnakes, I guess. But for the most part, I walk around like snakes don't exist. I just and just assume. And then if I see one, I go, that's really cool. And I take a picture of it and I continue on with my day. So I try to be careful. I don't want to step on a snake. It's just pretty unlikely. But give them a wide berth. And then this is actually at the Snake Road that I took this photo so you can see a cottonmouth up close and why they call them cottonmouths. So that was pretty exciting. In fact, Dr. Molenbrock, who, of course, wrote the Vascular Flora of Illinois, he was here at SIU. He still lives in Carbondale. I visit with him every few months. He told me that he took him 5 students before he would find one that was willing to do the Flora of Grantsburg Swamp. But I don't know if they kept to it because a lot of his students did floristic inventories at our natural areas, but none exists for this. I was looking into it right before the presentation this morning, and Mark Basinger, who did a lot of our list and came out of SIU, he did one, but he never published it. So I don't think there are any published flora lists for Grantsburg Swamp, which was another reason why I wanted to put some of this presentation together. And we should do that. We should make a list. But of course, Dr. Molenbrock took him so long to find a student to do it because they would go out there and they'd see a few cottonmouths and they'd say, I'm done with this. I don't want to work in this area. So while we were out there on this survey, luckily they found it fascinating and weren't too spooked out by the experience to not want to continue surveying, because we went along and then we found this wild looking caterpillar that I've never seen before in my life, the banded Sphinx moth. I mean, it's like, I don't know, the size of my thumb maybe or finger. It is big caterpillar. And what was also really neat about that is it was occurring on a plant that I'd never seen before either, which is this hairy primrose willow, Ludwigia leptocarpa. So if you're familiar with our common seed box, Ludwigia alternifolia, that one is not hairy. This one is very hairy. And then it has a really long calyx here, which is, of course, going to turn into the fruit. You know, seed box is a little tiny square fruits on it. So different in many ways, and it occurs, you know, close in wetlands. This is something I just clearly had overlooked. It's not necessarily rare, I guess, and I had seen it a few times after this, but this was the first time I remembered that. So I have maps for all these plants. Anything that's in a green county means that it's been documented at some point in that county. So you can see in Southern Illinois, just a few counties where this plant has been occurring. And if you notice these maps as we go through them, there are a lot of them are going to look like this. They're going to be plants that are more common in the Southeast and just barely get into Southern Illinois. Now we have a featherfoil, another super cool plant. I mean, it doesn't matter where you're from. People love this plant. It's not like, oh, that's common here and it's rare there. No, it's uncommon enough. It's so neat that people in every state seem to love the featherfoil. Hottonia inflata, it germinates in the winter. So when we have a dry winter, the seeds germinate. They're annuals, so they germinate there in the bare soil, and then they grow in April. So we were there. This is my friend Abel Kinzer, and he's investigating the plants. You know, they float on the water, so that's kind of interesting. I like this picture because it really shows that. I mean, this is what you got to do to enjoy these places. You got to get down in the muck and get wet and dirty, and you don't even think about it because you're so fascinated about what you're seeing. So, of course, this is going to turn into this glorious plant when they bloom in mid-April. And because they're annuals, they have years where there's lots of it and then other years where maybe there's none. So they really change depending on the conditions. This last winter, super dry. We had lots of germination. All these places had featherfoil this year that I had not seen before. The ditch by the motel in Carbondale had featherfoil growing in it. I mean, it's really something, and they're just so neat. And they last for about 2 weeks, and then they wither away and they're gone. So there's the range on that. And you can see it's not really common. So the yellow counties mean that it's documented there and it's considered rare. Green is documented there, not considered rare, but it's not common throughout its range. Another neat one here is the wild Petunia. I just mentioned this because I just really like this wildflower. Petunias are South American, and they're in the nightshade family, which are tomatoes. So this no relation to Petunia, the genus Petunia. I don't know why the common name is that. It's Ruellia, caroliniensis, and this is one that I don't encounter very often because the flowers are sessile. They're right on the top of the plant. They're not on a long stalk, so it separates them from the other 3 Ruellias in Illinois. So that's a neat one. And here you can see again, we're on the edge of its range in southern Illinois. Now, here is the plant we were doing the big survey for, American Snowbell bush, Styrax americanus. And they bloom about mid-May, or second week in May, mid-May, and they are really beautiful if you find ones with lots of flowers like this one here. And I'm finding that they're fairly common in our wetlands. In fact, they occur as far north as Kankakee and up in Hamilton County and a little bit in Wayne and Edwards, but most of it is down. The farther south you go, the bigger populations you tend to encounter. So all around Heron Pond and in the Cache River wetlands and in southern Polk County and other wetlands in the area. So I did this huge survey for the Illinois Native Plant Society because I had a feeling that if we documented and mapped all the occurrences, we were going to find out that it is common enough to not be listed as threatened anymore. And that is the conclusion I reached, and that is the my plan as we go through reviewing the list for changes. I'm going to recommend that this be removed, and I have others to recommend to be added. In any event, this is what it looks like. You can see it has these cute fruits. They're pretty recognizable later in the year. And, you know, you look at the leaves here and you think, well, that doesn't look like a whole lot. Like, I mean, it's what are the features? It's alternate leaved. Most woodies are alternate leaves. There's kind of some teeth on the margin sometimes. There's no hairs, but it does have a distinct look to it when you survey and count 50,000 stems. You get a pretty good idea of that. But if you ever have any doubt, try to find some of these little fruits, little round ones. They're very distinct.
Is that a fruit or
well, it's a fruit, and I believe it's a drupe, which is a fleshy coated single seeded fruit. But we'd have to look that up. But definitely the fruit with seed inside.
The fruits as the bear?
Throughout the fall, really. Yep. So you see the range here. I mentioned there's up in Kankakee County, and of course a little bit here in Indiana, but mostly it's a southern species, Styrax. Another really neat plant there is this carrot, mock bishop's weed, Ptilimnium costatum. It's very frilly leaves. A lot of wetland plants do have very heavily divided leaves like that. And, you know, the carrots, they kind of all look the same. They have these little umbellifer flowers, little white flowers. Often, sometimes they're yellow, but often white. But those really frilly leaves in the wetland habitat set that apart. There's another picture. So you can see they kind of get to be somewhat tall and cute little white flowers there in the woods. And there's the range on that. So that's not very common throughout its range in this part of the world. And another carrot is Sium suave, which is a fun one to say, the water parsnip. You know, a lot of these plants kind of get a bad rap because we have the poison hemlock and water hemlock, which are deadly poisonous, and they look kind of similar. So this one, I suppose, could get confused with that. And there's other wetland plants that are somewhat similar. You kind of have to look at the leaves and the habitat. This one is also is one that the above ground, the leaves that are not underwater are typically large and divided like that, but the underwater leaves are very dissected, very freely. You would think they were two separate plants if you saw the different leaf types at the same time. But the underwater leaves often are quite different because they're growing in wetlands. They have to deal with this flooding, this water issues all the time. And you see the range on that. So we're actually kind of interestingly at the southern edge, really, of the range for this species in general. Now, here's the featherbell. So I think there's at least a dozen, if not more, rare plant species that we track at this site. So there's a lot of interesting ones. And this is one that we do every year because the plants are perennials, but they don't always bloom. We have several populations this year. None of them bloom. There'd be 40, 50 clumps of plants, no blooms. Other years, this particular population actually was discovered here at Giant City State Park a couple of years ago, and there were 11 blooms the year they found it. The next year there was one, and this year there weren't any. But just plants are still there. And next year there might be a dozen again. Who knows? So we're going every year to keep an eye on them. But I mean, if this is blooming, this is going to catch your eye. It's 8 feet tall. It's this huge, spreading white flowers. But if it doesn't bloom and it's just this little tuft of green leaves that looks like grass, it's not going to probably catch your eye. And that's why this was discovered at Giant City. Was some people it was close enough to a trail and somebody spotted it, like, what is that? Of course you're going to say that, and found out it was a new location for the featherbells, also called grass-leaved lily. So there's one little spot there at Grantsburg. The other interesting thing about this plant is here at Giant City, it's grown where it's dry. I got other places where it comes out of the rock. It grows on rock bluffs, and then it grows in Grantsburg Swamp, and it grows down in Karnak in the wet ditch along the side of the highway. So it seems to like a bunch of different types of habitats.
Chris, are those triangle leaves? Like a mitten almost?
The leaves are like these little grass leaves here. Yeah.
Part.
Yep. Yep. I think that's a sassafras there.
That's what I
Okay. So Chris Evans, so he's one of the volunteer monitors. You know, Chris is in this profession, but he has interns every summer. So he does this monitoring for me with his interns. I think they're going to be doing it soon, but here he is posing with a couple plants. You know, Chris is probably close to 6 feet, maybe a little under, and you can see the plants are, you know, taller than he is. So they're neat to find there, and that's out in the swamp. So looking at the range there, it's actually in a bunch of other counties north of here, but it's generally farther south. And then this one here was an interesting find. The Shawnee National Forest botanist gave me a list of plants that were possibly extirpated on the Shawnee National Forest. And there were 2 on there that are in the slideshow that we found at Grantsburg Swamp. One was this Hydrolea uniflora. It's got these little blue flowers. It's actually interesting. I was there with Nick. We found the Styrax americanus. We were mapping the location and writing down the associate species, and that caused me to look closer to see what was growing there. And it wasn't blooming. It's not much to look at without blooms. It's just a little green plant. It's kind of sprawling. And I looked and thought, well, here's Hydrolea we've been looking for that had been reported and hadn't been seen in 40, 50 years or so. So it was fun to document that. And I went to take a picture, and I got pricked. And I saw a spider, and I thought, did that spider bite me? What was that? What did I touch? I didn't know it has spines on it.
Oh.
There's spines right here. So be careful handling that plant. What's really wild about this species in southern Illinois is it grows in southern Pope County. There's a spot on Unionville Road. And then there's one in the Cache River. There's a big population. And then on Route 3 in Jackson County, and then on private land in Pulaski County. And those are the 4 places in Grantsburg. So those are 5 places that I know. It's like here, 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 and here. Interesting distribution. Why is that? But in any event, it is really rare, and it's got these blue flowers. It's actually blooming now. I photographed it in down by Sandridge Road, down near Fountain Bluff, in the ditch, just on Friday. So you can see there, it's more common to the south. And in fact, I don't think they have Pope County on this map. So that may be a county record. We'll have to look into that. Here's a cool fern, netted chain ferns. One of my favorites was Woodwardia. And this is actually interesting in that it often grows on rock around here, on sandstone, bluffs and things, and wet rock. But then it also has places where it'll grow where it's really wet, just on the ground. At Touch of Nature, actually, surprisingly, when I did surveys out there, I saw huge patches of this fern. And then when you get out in Pope County, you find everything thrives, everything grows in Pope County. Really, there's so much there. You think, this thing's so rare, I'd never see it. Go to Pope County.
Chris, is that just to the left of the largest frond, is that its spores?
That is. So some ferns have the reproductive parts underneath the leaves, and other ones have a totally separate fertile frond. So that is the fertile frond. They look like little kind of withered up leaves, but those are where the spores are produced for reproduction. So we look at the range there again, more southern, just barely gets into southern Illinois. Now some sedges. Sedges are cool. There's just a couple rare ones that I threw in here because I don't see these. I think I only have 3 sites that I know of for Carex gigantea, maybe 4. But it is really distinct because the Paraginia beaks, they're almost at a completely horizontal angle. They stick straight out to the side. And they're kind of large, but the real thing to look at on them are the achenes. So the fruit is the achene, and the seed is actually part of that. But they're inside a Paraginia, which is a papery sac. That's what makes a Carex. This whole genus of plants called sedges and the Carex genus. So they're in that genus because they produce Paraginia, the paper-like sac that surrounds the achene. The characteristics of the Paraginia are very important for identification. The characteristics of the achenes are important for identification. If you look at these, they're very knobby and they're almost straight across on the top. So that is distinct for identifying this one. And you can see the range there, just a few counties in the area. But if we go to Carex lupuluformis, it has a little different of the spikelets there. And then this is Gigantea on the left, and on the right, the lupuluformis. So they kind of look similar, but they're both pretty knobby. This is a little bit larger, but there are differences there. So the lupuluformis, what's interesting about this map is Carex lupulina is very common. It's called hop sedge. And it can be variable in the amount of knobbiness of the achenes. And so this distribution map is probably wildly incorrect. Mike Murphy is doing sedges at the Illinois Natural History Survey, and he went through every specimen he could find for Carex lupuluformis that was labeled as lupuluformis and said, no, it's lupulina. And he found very few that were legitimately lupuluformis. So now we know nothing about the distribution of this in Illinois. We don't have a lot of collections that are legit. I've found about 6 or 7 now. And that is the key to identification, is these knobby corners on the achene. And I've gotten to the point now really where I can just grab the spikes and feel it with my fingers and feel how knobby it is and get a pretty good idea that it's lupuluformis. So that is really fun. Sleuthing, really, getting better distribution stuff. Now, this plant we saw when Katie and Gretel were visiting in that September, and I have never seen this flower before or since. This is one of the lettuces. They used to be Prananthes, now Nebulus crepidinius. If you go along the Snake Road, but instead of going on Snake Road, go south on that Otter Pond Road and walk towards the end, there are thousands of leaves of this plant. It never blooms. I've never heard of anyone seeing it bloom there. You see this plant around. It's not rare. It's always vegetative and lots of leaves, like a big carpet. We're walking along the highway going to another spot, and they're like, what is this? And here's this 6-foot-tall blooming great white lettuce, never seen before. These are the styles here.
And she's holding a leaf there?
Yeah, yep, and it's flowering up here. So it's almost as tall as she is. And this is a close-up of the flower. They're pretty large and hairy, and they have the styles here are really neat in that they curve around. So super cool. I mean, I've never seen that plant before or since. And you see the range there. Like I said, it's not uncommon vegetatively. You just don't see it bloom very much. And this is growing along the highway in full sun. That could be a thing. We have a lot of plants that don't get enough light they need to bloom. So they persist as vegetatively. And then I threw this in there because this is one of our parasitic plants. You know, I think somebody could easily look at this and think it's a mushroom, but it's not. It's a flowering plant. So it has one flower, hence the name uniflora, ghost pipe monotropa. And this one it's hard to reliably go see this. I've seen it enough that I can't remember everywhere that I've seen it, but I also feel like it doesn't come back every year. So it's a hard one to go seek out. I have not seen any yet this year, but we see the range there. It's all around the place, not rare at all. And another plant not rare is this lizard's tail, which I'm sure a lot of you know. It's very aptly named. It's this botanical name with too many U's. Okay, Saruris cernuus is how I pronounce it. Of course, Saruris is Latin for lizard, and cernuus means nodding. So lizard tail is a good name for that, and it grows in these big clumps in wetlands. It's all throughout the state in various wetlands.
It looks like it's growing in water.
It typically, yeah, you could see some water through here. It typically is in shallow water, yep, in these wetlands. So it has to deal with fluctuating water levels in a lot of these wetlands. Pretty common. And then I want to put in the Virginia dayflower because I think most people know the Asiatic dayflower, the garden weed and weed in all places. And this is a native one. And we can tell because the lowest petal is blue. The lowest petal on the Asiatic dayflower is white. So that's a little bit different. There's other differences too, but that's the most obvious one you can see in the photo. But that is in Southern Illinois, a bunch of counties. Not commonly seen. If it's not blooming, it doesn't catch your eye and it's a little harder to identify, but it is around. And then swamp milkweed is one of my favorites, and it grows abundantly at Grantsburg Swamp. It has these seeds, these fruits that are winged. They are adapted for water dispersal. You know, all the other milkweeds have the cottony fluff. The wind, moves them around. There's not a lot of wind moving through the forested wetlands, and so it has a totally different adaptation for dispersal to float on the water. But it is a beautiful milkweed, Asclepias perennis. Oh, also not to be confused with swamp milkweed. That's Asclepias incarnata that has pink flowers. This is white swamp milkweed.
Do the monarchs stop on that?
They do. Yep, they do. And you can see there, it's pretty much associated with the Mississippi River and down into Florida. So it's a neat one to have. I think I just have a few more slides here. This is another really neat one here, the Mosquito Fern, and or Azolla, I like to call it, Azolla mexicana. So it's the brown stuff here. The green is milkweed or duckweed. There's various kinds of duckweeds, but the little brown parts here are individuals of the Azolla fern. Grows in wetlands, so they call it mosquito fern. The plant, this is a nitrogen fixer. In fact, there's stuff that suggests that this plant was hugely responsible for the fact that humans and other life forms could evolve on Earth because of what it was doing with nitrogen. And it was so prolific at one time. Of course, it's creating a lot of oxygen at the same time. So it really was important into, the evolutionary history of Earth, contributing to that. So the Azolla is fun to find. I think it's a C10. The conservatism values mean if it's found in a pristine natural area, it's a C value of 10. For a weed is a C value of 0. So this is a 10. We see the range there. Interesting. It's basically, it's throughout Illinois, but only along the Mississippi, Illinois rivers for the most part. So that's fun to find. And monkey flower, another common wetland plant I'm sure you all have seen. Mimulus elatus. Of course, elatus means winged. It's talking about the little wings here and the fruits, basically. The leaves here are on little stalks. If they were sessile without stalks, then it would be Mimulus ringens, because there are 2 species in Illinois. I've seen ringens only once in southern Illinois on the banks of the Ohio River near Joppa. It's generally more north, but they are both in southern Illinois. You see the range on that, almost every county for the monkey flower. And this is a plant that I saw there that I've only seen. In southern Illinois, I've only seen this once, the Grantsburg Swamp. And it's mapped for this county, which is Johnson County. It is, I call this the artist formerly known as Cacalia. The genus Cacalia, which I think is a beautiful word and term, has changed, and several went to Arnoglossum, and this one went to Hastiola, although Bonap actually has it as Senecio, which I had not encountered that before. But whatever you call it, it's the sweet Indian plantain. I found it 2021 there. Went back in 2022. It was growing further along, but I still didn't catch any blooms. So now I have to go back again, try to catch it in bloom this time. But there's just a few plants there. Like I said, this is the only place I've ever seen it in southern Illinois, which is Pope County, which it is mapped for Pope and Hardin, it looks like, as well as Williamson. So I've got some searching to do if I'm going to track that one down. And then the orchids. So pretty. Purple fringeless orchid. This orchid is fairly common in southern Illinois and not really in a lot of the other places in its range. It is really something special to this region. You can see this here, Giant City State Park, Chautauqua Bottoms, right? The Green Earth site. You can see them along the trail there. It's really not that hard to find, and it is a beautiful one to seek out. You see there, we saw some at Grantsburg. So like I said, even throughout, this is really a lot of occurrences in southern Illinois and not really many outside of that. So that's cool. We have that. And then this one, even rarer, Platanthera flava variety flav. We call the flava flav orchid. And you can see the fun little yellow flowers there with the cypress knees adjacent. So this is an Illinois threatened species. I'm tracking all known populations every year. There are 8. We just had a volunteer find a new county record population in Pulaski County and Cypress Creek Wildlife Refuge. So that's new. I think this one is doing very well with perhaps climate change and other changes, because there are many large populations, thousands of them. In fact, I counted so many of this plant in 2021, I thought I never want to see this again. Because we try to use pin flags or do an accurate count. Oh, here's the picture. And this is pretty easy here. There's maybe, 25, 30 in this photo, but we've had thousands of them, and they're challenging to count. But it is a neat little orchid that we're glad to have here. And there's 2 varieties, so this map is kind of not that good for just showing this particular variety. But generally, flava flava is a southern species. flava variety Herbiola is to the north. And then another wetland plant is sponge plant here, Limnobium spongia, which is really fun. It's called sponge plant. I have a picture. I couldn't find it, but sometimes the leaves are inflated. You can push on them and really feel that sponginess. Of course, it helps them float on the surface of the water. And they're dioecious. So these are female flowers there. And on that one is actually the male flower. But this can be often covering large areas, floating on the surface of the water. It's a C10 conservative species. And look at its range in Illinois, just a few counties. In fact, we had a county record at Crab Orchard last year. See, Williamson County is right here next to Jackson. It's not shaded, so hadn't been recorded in that county yet. So that's exciting. Add to that. And then this was the other species on the list of possibly extirpated plants on the Shawnee National Forest. It had not been seen in some time, and it blooms right along Flatwoods Road. You can see this from your car if you go in September, mid-September. Find the turtlehead blooming. We don't have a lot of locations for this in Southern Illinois either. Heron Pond's got some. Down there's a state area that nobody ever goes to called Cypress Pond, which is down near Anna, and there's tons of it there. So it is really a pretty one, and one of the host plants for the Baltimore checker spot butterfly, which is rare in Illinois. A beautiful color. Then we have a white turtlehead too, which is actually really rare in Southern Illinois, but common in the rest of the state. That only grows in seeps. So like Cretaceous Hills and over in Southern Polk County. The Chelone, you see the range on that. Again, this is Illinois has more of this plant really than any other state. Chelone obliqua. And then this is the last slide of plants here. The Burr Marigold, Biden's laevis. This is a wildflower explosion to be seen in your lifetime. Grantsburg has it. It's like this at Boss Island down in the Cache River, a few other sites. They just get golden in late October, early November with the Burr marigolds, just filling up the space in the swamp. So this was, again, on my birthday, November 2nd, 21. The beautiful picture of the flowers. And these basically, it looks similar to Biden's Cernua, which is the nodding Burr marigold, but the flowers are like twice as big, really big flowers. You can see I'm measuring the length of the ray flowers there. And then on the backside of composites are these green bracts called filaries. They're super useful for identification. So it's funny that often people are drawn to the flower and they photograph it and they want to know which one is this. And you're like, well, there's 10 of them that look like that. We have to look at the leaves. We have to look at the filaries. Really helpful diagnostic feature for identifying these. But these are really amazing when they fill up the swamp later in the year. And even just driving along Highway 146, you could see them if you go later in the year. This isn't even mapped for Illinois. It's funny because Molenbrock has this in his 2014 publication as occurring in Johnson County, but it's not here in Bonap. So again, potential county record, state record needs to be documented. So we will do that. All right, so there's the final picture of me on one of the surveys in the fall. It's a really beautiful place to see. I hope I've inspired you to at least want to drive by it sometime when you're in that area and take a peek, and maybe I'll lead a hike there someday and take people in and we'll look at plants, because it is really a magnificent place. And I appreciate you attending and listening to me talk about it. So with that, I will conclude the slideshow and I would be happy to answer any questions.